Hi, everyone, and welcome to Day 3 of the 19th Represents, a week of virtual conversations elevating the voices of those changing the game in politics and public policy. I'm Emily Ramshaw, co-founder and CEO of the 19th, an independent nonprofit newsroom that aims to empower you with the information, resources, and community you need to be equal participants in our democracy. Over the last 2 days, we've heard from inspiring people who are expanding our understanding of representation in democracy and sports. Today, we turn to the fight for gender and racial equity in the business world. We'll start the day with Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo and her take on the care economy. We'll hear from leading philanthropists who are redefining social impact for this moment in history. We'll hear from labor leaders across diverse industries to explore the future of workers' rights. We'll hear an incredibly special performance from one of our favorite artists, Gina Chavez. And we'll close the day with two powerhouse history-making founders and CEOs.
Before we begin, I want to thank those who made this week possible, including our founding sponsor, Supermajority Education Fund, our presenting sponsor, The Impact Seat, and supporting sponsors, the Barbara Lee Family Foundation, the Facebook Journalism Project, and the Tory Burch Foundation. A final thanks to our media partner, the PBS NewsHour.
While our sponsors help keep the 19th Represents free for viewers like you to attend, they play no part in the programming of our events. Same goes for our speakers. 3 women on our lineup today, Catherine Murdoch, Priscilla Chan, and Whitney Wolfe Herd, have supported the 19th philanthropically. Let's begin with a keynote conversation featuring U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo. In her role in the Biden administration, she's focused on building a care economy that works for everyone. Previously, she served as the governor of Rhode Island, and before that was a venture capitalist. Judy Woodruff, the anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour, will lead the conversation.
Emily, thank you. I am delighted to be here and so delighted to be here with Secretary Raimondo. Welcome to everybody. So, Madam Secretary, let me just start by asking, just to remind everybody, what does the Commerce Secretary do? It used to be considered the liaison to the business community, but it's way progressed beyond that.
Yes, thank you. And it's great to see you, Judy. So the better question is, what doesn't the Commerce Department do? It is it's a large and broad organization. At our core, we're about enhancing American competitiveness, the ability for American businesses to compete globally, but it consists of a number of different departments or bureaus, ranging from everything, including the U.S. Patent Office, to the Census Bureau, to NOAA, which handles all things oceans and atmosphere. We have the Office of Space Commerce, which relates to all commercial space activity, all export promotion, which is a critical piece of what we do, helping American companies export their goods and services around the world. Increasingly, and particularly now, given where we are in our global competition, we do a lot of work around technology, semiconductors, supply chains, 5G, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity. So as you say, I think I am the administration's primary liaison to the business community. I have spent an awful lot of time in my first 5 months engaging with business leaders in all industries, businesses of all sizes. And as I said, everything I'm doing, although the operation is broad, it all revolves around the fundamental goal of enhancing American competitiveness.
And you're right. I should have asked you, what is it the Commerce Department doesn't do? But as you and I are having this conversation as the first Friday in August, as the new jobs numbers have come out, and I want to ask you about what these numbers say. The unemployment rate is down. The numbers look better for some sectors of the economy. But what do these numbers say about where we are with regard to getting people back to work and the economy overall?
Yes, overall, it's an excellent story. Lowest unemployment rate since we began the pandemic. Really a record number of jobs created since the president has become president. I think there are clear signs that President Biden's economic strategy is working. I take great comfort and optimism from the numbers. In fact, in the last 6 months, we've seen the highest number of jobs created in the first 6 months of any president's tenure. So all of that is good. Having said that, if you dig a bit deeper into the numbers, the unemployment rate among Black Americans is still over 8%, and that is unacceptable. Still, we have millions of women who fell out of the workforce during COVID and are still out of the workforce, still over 2 million women out of the workforce. Unemployment rate among women higher than we want it to be. Unemployment rate among people who don't have a college degree higher than where we need it to be. So I think, listen, I will say this: if you had told me a year ago, as the governor of a state, that in a year we would be nearly fully recovered economically from the pandemic, I never would have believed that. We thought it would take years. So again, it's great credit to the president and his economic team, the work we're doing. Clearly, we are on the right path. We are recovering at a much faster clip than I think anyone thought was possible. But there's an awful lot of work to do, awful lot of work to do, particularly for women, people of color, people in rural areas, people without a college degree. And so we're, I think still early innings of our overall economic comeback as a country as we build back better, making sure that there's equity.
Right. And I want to ask you, raised a number of things I want to ask you about. I mean, one is the people who still have not come back into the workforce. Jobs are out there. We see employers saying, please come to work, and salaries in some cases are going up. Is this the kind of imbalance that you think is going to last? How long is it going to take to resolve that?
First of all, it's hard to say. Second of all, so much of it revolves around childcare. So there are a number of reasons people aren't going back to work, even when jobs are available. Many people are still afraid. And right now, as we're talking, the Delta variant is raging. People are afraid. So I know, for example, in the hospitality industry, it's hard to get workers, to work in a hotel or a waiter or waitress. And a lot of that is fear. Folks don't want to go to work with the Delta variant where it is now if they're in a close contact business, like in a restaurant or a hospitality. So our number one job is get everybody vaccinated. There's no excuse at this point not to get yourself vaccinated. But the second thing is a lack of childcare. We're talking about women. If you think about who's in industries where folks are having a hard time getting labor, it is industries dominated by women: nursing homes, hospitality, restaurants, retail. And now we have a system in America where everyone can have access to high quality, reliable, affordable childcare. We're going to see women struggle to get back into the workforce. And that's why President Biden's plan, which Congress is deliberating on literally as we speak, he calls for historic investments in childcare, in the care economy, in home care, in a child care tax credit. And I'll tell you, as a Commerce Secretary, these things are fundamental to our economic recovery.
And I mean, there's so much about that matters, of course, to the course of the economy. But in particular, when we think about women and the number of women who have, as you said, stopped working because of the pandemic, because of the childcare shortage. We know that there's money in one part of legislation moving through Congress, the so-called reconciliation bill, social infrastructure, if you will. How much difference does that kind of help make for women broadly? And what's needed to make it possible for women to do the work that they want to do, but also make sure their children are taken care of?
Yes, I think it's fundamental. I really do think it's fundamental. And I, not to make it personal, but I know my own personal life. I have 2 children who have had excellent care and great preschool. I saw my kids flourish in preschool when they were 4 and 5 years old. My mom, who's 90, has a wonderful care team taking care of her in her home. All of that enables my husband and I to be in the workforce. And so until, and by the way, I talk to CEOs pretty much daily, and they will tell me they have a lot of women who are their very best employees, their very best software developers, their very best managers. They want them to take promotions. They're offering them promotions, but women are saying, I can't do it right now. I can't do it right now. With schools being closed, with childcare hard to find, with, maybe they have, as I have, an elderly mother or father, it's hard to find care. They're having to either drop out of the workforce or maybe part-time, or maybe not, be fully engaged, saying no to that promotion, which is, holds us back as an economy. And it's certainly not equitable. When we talk about building back better, it's building back equitably means everyone ought to be able to participate to their fullest potential in the economy. And so I think it's childcare, providing high quality childcare, providing public pre-K, providing high quality home care. This isn't a luxury. It's fundamental. Every other developed nation in the world is far ahead of America in this regard. Basic things like paid time off, paid sick leave, a child care tax credit. It's past time for this to happen. It's good for our economy, and America needs to catch up. Last thing I'll say is, I mentioned earlier, my primary charge is positioning America for success globally. We want to be globally competitive. There's so much talk about how do we compete with China. Well, investments in what I'm talking about are absolutely necessary for America to compete globally.
And I know many women will say that they believe their employers are not doing enough to accommodate their needs around family, whether it's an elderly parent or a member of the family who's ill, or childcare. It's all well and good to ask the government to do something, but employers have a role as well.
Fundamentally and absolutely, I agree with that. And I would say many employers are behind and need to catch up. But I also think that COVID put a big spotlight on how necessary women are in the workforce, and how women aren't able to participate fully without paid leave, childcare, an ability to have some flexibility. And so I do know a lot of employers are stepping up their game because they learned the lesson of COVID. Increasingly, I'm hearing from employers that they are increasing their leave policies, allowing for more flexibility for telecommuting and virtual working on an ongoing permanent basis. Hearing from a lot more employers who are providing childcare on site, at work, providing dental and health care on site, increasing maternity and paternity leave. So they need to catch up. We are behind, as we said earlier, employers too, but I'm starting to feel hopeful that many employers are doing that work to catch up.
And part of the picture, of course, is the salary for people who care for others, the so-called care economy. I was looking, the Bank of America estimating unpaid care economy work amounts to 9% of global GDP at just a minimum wage. It's a huge part of our global economic picture. And then in this country, we know we have a long way to go.
Yes, a long, long way to go. And by the way, it's going to get worse if we don't take action as baby boomers age, and some people refer to it as the quote unquote silver tsunami, just the demographics. If you just look at how many Americans are going to be turning 80 over time, we don't have the care infrastructure in this country to take care of these folks. And nursing homes are incredibly expensive. If you talk about the cost of providing healthcare, it is much more expensive to care for somebody in an institutional setting like a nursing home or hospital than their home. And we just do not have enough home care workers to take care of everyone in their home as they age. And frankly, as you say, a lot of that is because they don't make enough money. I mean, it's not right to pay people $10, $11, $12 an hour such that they will be living in poverty, even though they're working full time, and asking them to take care of elderly or disabled Americans in their home. It's critical work, and yet we underpay them. President Biden has proposed a $400 billion investment in the care economy, in exactly what we're talking about, the workforce to take care of folks in their home. And a lot of that 400 billion would go into raises for these women. And by the way, it's almost all women. It's almost all women of color. And they are social workers and care workers and nurses. And I hope Congress considers very seriously passing that $400 billion investment in our care economy, because it's good for our economy, it's good for our healthcare system, and quite frankly, it's necessary. We will have a crisis of care soon if we don't make these investments.
And yet, as you know very well, it is caught up in the partisan disagreements, differences over how much to spend, how much it contributes to the deficit, whether the government should be spending as much as it is. So we'll see what happens to that. But it's very much politics at work. Two other quick questions I want to ask you, Secretary Raimondo, about work, and that is, the jobs that are increasingly going to be available in the future are jobs that require the kinds of skills that many people don't have. I saw that you were recently in New York. You were, I guess, together with the Labor Secretary, Marty Walsh, looking at workforce training, workforce development. Is this country going to be ready, whether it's in 5 years, 10 years, with people to do the jobs that have to be filled?
Yeah. Yes, if we start to make changes quickly and urgently. So we have a massive skills gap in America. Every single CEO I talk to, literally everyone, from the biggest companies to the smallest, says they cannot find, they do not have access to people with the skills that they need as quickly as they need them. And so that means we need to make investments in apprenticeships so people can earn while they learn. We need to fundamentally improve career and technical education in our high schools. We need to start teaching digital and tech skills to our students in public schools, younger, in middle school and in high school. We need much more applied job training. And we have to face the reality that every business is increasingly a digital business. No matter what business you're in, it's going to become increasingly data intensive, digitally intensive, which means our entire workforce, all of us, need to become more digitally literate, technologically literate, and the need for cybersecurity analysts, data scientists, software engineers is exploding, and we have to really meet that need. And again, I will just say, I'm proud to work for a guy in President Biden who recognizes this. We have before Congress a request for $100 billion investment in apprenticeships and job training. And that, the short answer to your question is, if we make those investments, yes, we can meet the need. If we don't, we won't, and America will lag. Right now, America is still the best place in the world to do business, to start a business, and to run a business. And a large part of that reason is because of our talent supply, our great university system, our research and development. We are running a very real risk of putting all of that at risk if we don't make the kinds of investments the president is calling for.
Yeah, and I know you're referring to government course, we're talking about government investment. The private sector has to do its own share, but the federal share, crucial there. Another aspect of the jobs picture I want to ask you about, Secretary Raimondo, is the extent to which some Americans have gotten accustomed to remote work, staying at home, not going to an office or to a workplace. We know many Americans can't do that. They have to be on site or they can't do the job. But do you see that as a larger feature of American work, or how do you see that?
I do. I think we will see some amount of flexibility, allowing folks to work from home to become a permanent feature of the way we go forward. I think, as you say, a lot of people cannot do their work from home, and that, of course, will remain that way. But I think that most employers are going to require folks to be in the office some part of every week, because you need to be in person to be collaborative, work with your team members, be part of a team, be part of a culture. It's easier to be creative when you're in person. But I think you're increasingly going to see employers, forever allow for flexibility, allow for people to work from home, some part of every week.
I want to broaden out the conversation now to talk a little bit about the international global picture and trade. There's a story in the news very recently about more business groups urging President Biden to get trade talks started again with China. It's a complicated issue. We know former President Trump took his own approach to that, imposed tariffs. A number of these business leaders are saying that's not helpful. It's hurting them, they believe, as much as it's hurting China. Where do you see that going? How do you see right now the economic and trading relationship between the United States and China, and where is it headed?
Yeah. So as you say, it's complicated. China is our greatest strategic competitor, clearly and by far. And China has shown it is willing to do things that are anti-competitive, coercive, violate human rights, do things that undermine America's national security. And so, President Biden and our team are determined to do whatever it takes to protect the American people and our businesses. And frankly, to require China to play by the rules. China doesn't play by the rules. They steal our IP. They don't protect our intellectual property. They don't live up to their obligations under the current trade agreements. They block access for American companies to their markets. So I would say, certainly, we want to enable American companies to export to China. It's a huge and growing market. I talk to businesses all the time. We're trying to help them increase their exports to China, their goods and also their services and digital trade. We want to encourage all of that with China, but we do need to hold China accountable, and they need to, they need to play by the rules and follow the rules and live up to their commitments. And we plan to hold their feet to the fire in that regard.
And you can't talk about China right now without talking about what's happened to the supply chain, and in particular what's going on with semiconductors, which of course, these chips are used in virtually everything that's manufactured. So much of that manufacturing was shipped off to China when the United States decided the salaries were too high, too high, that many companies didn't want to pay that much. It's gone to China. Now we have this backlog. Where are we going? I mean, when is that going to get cleared up? How long is it going to take? And is the U.S. just permanently ceding manufacture of important things like semiconductors to China?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. You're right. You are right. We, over the past decades, have in search of cheaper labor, as you say, have allowed some of our most important goods, like semiconductors, to be increasingly made overseas. And then we wake up and find ourselves very vulnerable, as you just said. The vast majority of the semiconductors that America buys come from Taiwan. America makes 0% of the world's leading edge semiconductors are made in America, which is a pretty stunning and uncomfortable, if not scary, reality. And as we talked about before, increasingly, we need more semiconductors. If our lives are becoming more digital, that means we are becoming much more reliant upon semiconductors. So we realize we've allowed that to happen, and it's time to reverse course. The Congress right now is debating the president's proposal. In fact, it went through the Senate to make a $52 billion investment in incentivizing domestic production of semiconductors. And it's weaving its way, as we speak, through the House. That fund will come to the Department of Commerce, and it will be my #1 priority as Commerce Secretary to properly implement that fund in order to stimulate domestic production of semiconductors. It's quite simple. We need to make more chips in America so that we're not vulnerable. A year and a half ago, as the governor of Rhode Island, I, like most governors, had a lot of sleepless nights, up all night on the phone, mostly with manufacturers in China or sometimes Vietnam, trying to get our hands on ventilators and PPE because we didn't make it enough in America. And that is a very vulnerable place to be. And the same is true for semiconductors. The same is true for pharmaceuticals. And so the Biden administration has a huge priority on reshoring our critical parts of our supply chain. We've lost 25% of small and medium-sized manufacturers in America out of business in the past 25 years. So we will build back. We're not permanently in this position, but we have a lot of work to do.
It's painful to hear some of those numbers, and I think everybody realizes that you can't stand up these manufacturing facilities overnight. So it's going to take a long time. I do want to pivot in the time that we have left, Secretary Raimondo, to something else that's part of one other thing that's part of your portfolio, and that is the Census Bureau. There's been it became a political issue, but right now we are looking at, I guess, the census report coming out pretty soon. I don't know how much you've seen of what they're going to be reporting about, but I wonder if you could just spend a minute or so giving us a portrait of the changing face of America. This country is changing. We do the census every 10 years. What is America looking like now?
Mm-hmm. So first, I want to assure everybody that the census data is accurate and will be accurate. And the Census Bureau deserves enormous credit for that. Last year, trying to collect data in a pandemic with civil unrest through the summer was incredibly hard, and they got the job done. And of course, I rely on the expertise of the demographers and the statisticians, and they assure me that we will have accurate data that people can have confidence in. And I think that's so important. This shouldn't be political. The census should not be political. And I want to be crystal clear that in our administration, it won't be political. We're gonna let the data and the scientists and the statisticians lead and not interfere with that. And I do have great confidence in them and in the numbers. The country is becoming, obviously younger. The cities are exploding, much more multicultural, less white. We will, many places you'll see, big changes in cities becoming majority minority, majority non-white. And I think that we have to recognize that as our strength and just recommit ourselves to making sure that everybody has access to skills and education so that they have a chance at getting decent jobs.
I think a lot of people are going to want to immerse themselves in that data when it comes out. And finally, Secretary Raimondo, I want to ask you just about the job. I mean, you were governor of the state of Rhode Island. We looked it up. The budget is something like over $12 billion. The annual budget for the state. I think you oversaw something like 14,000 employees. You now at Commerce Department have what, 2 or 3 times that number, maybe more than that. And the budget is not even as big at Commerce as it was for the state of Rhode Island, although I think you're clearly asking for more. But tell us about the difference in the jobs and which one's more fun. And I'm sure you're going to say you love this one, but just give us a sense of what it's like doing your job.
Yeah, so they're both fun. They're in some ways they're quite similar. You know, I'm a public executive. I'm, running an operation here at Commerce. I ran the state in Rhode Island. So the skills of leadership are quite similar and familiar to me. Working with a legislative body, I've been doing that for 10 years, and now I'm extremely engaged on Capitol Hill, trying to push through the president's agenda. So that's very familiar to me. The issues are quite similar, economic development, jobs, job training. I think the biggest difference here, apart from just the sheer scale, as you said, is, here I'm on a team. I'm on a team trying to execute on President Biden's agenda. Whereas as the governor, I was the chief executive, more setting that agenda. And it's different. Both are fulfilling. I feel enormously, blessed and honored to be on the team that is going to turn around America at such a critical time. And these issues we're talking about today are so fundamental. Our economic security, our economic equality in the face of a changing demography, making sure Americans have opportunity, even despite the rapid rate of technological change, economic and national security. So it's great to be on the team. I have a great boss. I feel very lucky in that respect. And I'm just trying to use all the skills that I have to get the job done.
You miss being your own boss?
I don't actually. In some ways, it's kind of a relief. In a way, when you're the governor, when you're accountable for everything. During COVID, I did, I think, 100 daily live press conferences in a row. It's nice to be on a team and to have, to be able to collaborate.
We'll have to share that with President Biden. Tell him he could do daily news conferences too.
He's doing great. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know how he does it. I so admire his stamina and energy. I think he knows he's got to deliver, and that's what he's doing.
Secretary Gina Raimondo, Secretary of the Commerce Department, thank you very much. This has been a real treat to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great to see you.
Thank you, Secretary Raimondo and Judy, for getting us started. On to our next conversation. I'm pleased to introduce you to women on the cutting edge of American philanthropy who are working to redefine social good and bring about meaningful change. Priscilla Chan is the co-founder and co-CEO of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which focuses on science, education, community, justice, and opportunity. Catherine Murdoch, co-founder and president of the Quadrivium Foundation, will spearhead this discussion.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Priscilla. I just have a few questions about your work as a philanthropist. First of all, when did you first become aware of philanthropy as an idea?
Gosh, philanthropy is such a big word and sounds so intimidating. So I'm gonna say, like, when did, like, giving back and like why was giving back important? I have been incredibly lucky, and I feel like I have benefited from so much of what America has to offer, and in its founding core. My parents came here as refugees from Vietnam, didn't speak English, neither of them went to college, but I did okay because I was in great public schools. I had mentors who cared about me, who always pointed the way towards, like, hey, try that next. Things I never knew about, things I didn't know existed. And that actually, it just, you know, the opportunity to go to Harvard after being a child of refugees who didn't go to college, who didn't speak English, who worked in restaurants, like, that was incredible. And once I got there, I knew I had to give back. I had to open the doors for others along the way. And so I ran an after school program in college. I went to medical school to better serve those who don't have access to care. And, you know, my hopes and dreams and my opportunities grew as I got older. But at the core, I always knew that I had been incredibly lucky and I needed to do my part to open doors for others.
And when there's giving back, and I think that's something that's so kind of uniquely American, actually, is this idea that at all levels of society we give back when we've done well. But transitioning to a foundation is a big step. So how do you think about setting up your foundation? How did all that background, those unique perspectives, how did you bring that into your foundation?
Yeah, I would say at my core, I never dreamt of running a large organization or foundation. At my core, I love being a frontline practitioner. I love being in the classroom. I love being in the clinic. I love talking to families and being with kids. No matter how long I do this job, that's how I'm always going to see myself. And the thing is, I ran into so many barriers as a teacher, as an advocate, as a pediatrician, where I couldn't do my job as well as I wanted to, because either we didn't have the tools or the systems weren't set up for practitioners to actually be successful. And so when we talked about the chance to start an organization to really think about broader ecosystems and how we could do our part in actually improving education and making science move faster, to actually improve human life, I was excited about that because I didn't want to fail another kid in the classroom, and I didn't want to tell another family that there was no other option for their child's treatment. And so I shifted gears. I shifted gears to building CZI, and you know, the spaces that we work in are huge: education, basic science research. So we really had to think about, like, what is our niche? How can we actually contribute to these giant problems with lots of other wonderful people and organizations working in them? And for Mark and I, it's our lenses. As for me, I'm at my core, how do I better support the scientist at the bench, the teacher in the classroom? And for Mark, it's really, how do we build tools that actually scale and are easy to use to make an impact in others' lives? And with those two lenses together, we've been sort of navigating, like, okay, what is a good CZI shaped problem for us to be able to solve?
That must be the biggest challenge, is trying to figure out, really, there's so many problems. What do you not focus on? How do you decide what not to do?
Yeah, it's we spend a lot of time looking at sort of both what other people are already doing a great job at, and that's the easy part. Like, wow, they're crushing that, let's not do that. But the harder part is, what are we uniquely able to do? And how can we both use our ability to, we have in-house engineering, so we build tools ourselves. We are able to convene lots of like-minded folks to work on a project together, and we can fund work that we think is important and should exist in this space. And so there's a lot of iterations, and I have to say, we get sharper on this as we have gotten, more reps under our belt. But one that I'm really, really excited about is this program named a product named Along. Last year, by May of 2020, we realized that kids were alone at home without the mooring that school gives a lot of kids, frankly. And we saw that reports of sort of mental health and child abuse were going down. And that was a bad thing, because the reports were going down. But more and more kids were isolated without the access to resources that they need to both feel connected to a community and to eventually to use that connection to be successful academically. So we were losing kids. So we started working, talking to a bunch of groups about something that's really important to me and to us as an organization: mentoring kids, making sure that they felt like they felt in the classroom. And we're like, every kid is alone. How do we do this? And what we did, we partnered with practitioners, researchers to actually cultivate really good research-based mentorship questions, where we make it easier to actually ask the next question, get to know a kid, be able to work with kids, teachers and kids, be able to work asynchronously. So we built a prototype of a piece of technology now we call Along, where kids could work with an adult in the classroom in that way to make sure that they didn't get lost and they were seen. So that is, for me, a really good example of how you take the best in the field, you build a tool to make it easier for others to use it, and then share it more broadly.
And it sounds like you get really involved in the work, and you are emotionally involved. How do you find the difference between being kind of, there's an intellectual problem that you need to solve, and getting emotionally involved and wanting to do everything for everybody? Because I think that's one of the really biggest challenges in work like this is, it's how do you balance the emotion and the intellect?
We try to be really clear about what we're going to do, what the roadmap looks like. And it's super fun and exciting. And one of my jobs as co-CEO is to protect that. Because if I sort of allow our organization to get distracted or say yes to everything, we're not going to do well at anything. And so, one of my core jobs is to actually say no to things and sort of get people to focus and double down and really evaluate, okay, is this actually going to net improve outcomes, or is it just a distraction? And then separately, as a discipline at our organization, we hold a responsive fund to when the wildfires are bad in California or there are floods, we can give responsively. But we're also, we don't, COVID is a good example where we have to jump in. We have to do something big. How do we put resources against that? But hopefully that's not something that comes up very often.
I know we both share an interest in science, but that's a big topic. What do you think is most misunderstood about science? What do you hope to achieve in this area specifically?
Yeah, I think people think of basic science as really far afield from human health. But actually, every time in basic science where you can see the world differently, you can see different solutions on how to actually keep human health, humans healthy. But also, as we understand disease at a more granular level, some people call it precision medicine, a lot of genetics and genomics are involved. We understand that something that we used to call one big group is actually a lot of little diseases, and it connects very directly to basic science research. So the gap between what's happening in the lab and what's happening in people's lives is closing. I also think that it's often easy to, look at what scientists do and you're like, you're studying an amoeba or you're studying yeast. Like, what does that mean? But like, that's where CRISPR came from. And CRISPR is going to change the way that we think about the fundamentals of science and medicine. And so you have to have a tolerance of really esoteric discoveries, knowing that understanding biology will always net improve outcomes for humans.
And how do you think about trying to bridge the gap between sort of the lay people and the scientific world? Because that does feel like that's one of the areas that is just so difficult right now.
This is incredibly important to us because we believe that patients should be involved in the scientific process. And we actually have a whole portfolio called Rare as One, where rare disease groups get together and actually partner with scientists in helping set agendas on what questions are actually important, and helping create registries, biobanks to make the science go faster, because they are deeply invested in moving science forward. And they want to participate, but oftentimes they're flung all across the country. And these networks help centralize them as a group that's incredibly powerful in getting the right questions answered. One example is Parkinson's. We all think about the tremor, but actually the fatigue is devastating. And so, can we get scientists looking at the fatigue? And oftentimes scientists in the lab can say, oh, I have this question, but I don't have the samples, the people, the natural histories to look at. These groups have access to that. They are that. And so the first step is getting these activated groups to participate, but actually getting people to understand the scientific process and wanting to contribute is something that I think we've all become better scientists over the past 18 months following COVID. We all have a better understanding on how the studies go, what the FDA is doing. And now we need to empower people to say, okay, here's how I could contribute. Here's how I want to contribute, because these are issues that impact all of us.
What's your favorite project? What do you enjoy doing?
Oh gosh, that question.
You can't love all your children equally.
Okay, yeah, fine. I'm totally. Happy to stack rank my kids every day. I mean, along which I just told you about is one I'm super excited about. Another, which is a new space for us to work in, is called Aspen, where we're building tools for departments of public health to actually sequence and map the COVID strains in their community against sort of the prevalent trends, and being able to monitor what's happening in any given community. And that one's interesting for us because we've just never worked in the public health space before. And being able to build a tool that allows these really sometimes small and decentralized departments of public health to have tools to respond in this moment has been incredibly gratifying.
And how are you thinking about success? So, what is a program that's successful? I often talk to people about, who are working in the nonprofit sector about thinking about putting themselves out of business, right? It's the opposite of the private sector, because if you're successful, you're not needed anymore. Obviously, there are areas where that's not the case, where you can move from topic to topic and continue to, apply things that are working. But when you're thinking about a program, how do you measure success, and how do you think, no, it's really not working, we're going to shut it down? What are those sort of criteria there?
Yeah. So I think we're getting better at this. And for success for us as an organization is being able to do what you just named, being able to look at the progress with a honest eye. Because as you know, once you start being a funder, you're never really going to know the truth of what's happening. And you sort of have to like really build a culture of learning and getting the right lessons learned. And for me right now at our stage, success is really having a clear eye on what we set out to do, what actually happened, and why or why not. And the why and why not is actually probably the most important part of this, because we need to build that muscle to get better at what we're doing over time. And one trap that we see that one can fall into is being satisfied at a local maxima. And you're like, this is pretty good. Like we're serving X number of people and it's going okay. But to really look at your full set of opportunities and saying like, is this really the best and highest use of, first of all, everyone's time and resources. And that has to be balanced against being a stable partner in a lot of these spaces where you don't want to thrash a leader or a community. And so those are sort of all the things that we keep in mind, how to be a stable partner, but how to make sure that we don't get trapped in local levels of success and always realigning ourselves to our North Star.
How do you think being a parent has changed, or maybe not changed, how has it affected what you work on? I know I started working on climate change when I had kids, although now I'm a lot more worried about my own old age than I am, not just them.
You're not there yet, but it's good to plan ahead. It's always good to plan ahead.
So, I mean, how do you think about, how does having kids affect what you're working on and your timeline on a lot of these things?
Yeah, I agree that a lot of things feel really urgent and important. I think for me, I agree that climate feels urgent right now. But the kid part for me is just realizing how complicated it is to get a kid to be ready to go to school at drop off in the morning. Like, did they sleep last night? Is the color of their outfit what they're happy with? Did they eat breakfast? Like, did their sister sort of take their toy? Like, all of those things that go into, like, when I drop you off at school, you're ready to be happy, healthy, and learn. Like, that's a lot. And I know that it's a challenge for me. And how can we actually support families to actually have kids ready? So we call it supporting the whole child, but having them be able to get to school and to be able to be successful. And on the basic science side, I want them to be excited about what's possible in the world. And when Jennifer Doudna won her Nobel Prize, I made my daughters watch a video online about her. I was like, she did something incredible. Like, I want them to be excited about just the awe of what is possible in the world and strive for that, especially raising two girls. And so I was like, she did this. I mean, I was probably a little bit too enthusiastic because they were like, who is this lady? What's happening? I was doing something else 5 minutes ago. But it's, you want them to be hopeful for the future too.
Do you think that there's a difference? This is the 19th, where we're focused on women in politics. Do you think that there's a difference between the way men and women do philanthropy? Have you?
I think it's hard to, I think it's a phenomenal that there are more and more women involved in philanthropy right now, and with a clear vision of what they want to see in the world. And I'm grateful that I'm not, I'm not a first here at all. There are lots of women doing incredible work in philanthropy. I think that for me, it's fun to bring in different perspectives. And, as we just talked about how being a mom changes our lens on philanthropy, I think we bring in different experiences. And for me, it's being that practitioner, and having been on the front lines. And I ask different question than Mark does when he looks at a problem, and he wants to understand how it all sort of stacks up for broader change, which is great, because I can get caught up on sort of like, oh, we have to help this one lab solve this interesting problem. So definitely there's what we all bring different things coming in to solve the same problem, but we're better together. I will say that. And CZI is an incredibly diverse place. We're majority women, and we have a large, really broad background, set of backgrounds, ranging from was most recently a basic scientist to I've always been in philanthropy to, I come from government. And the thing that we get to do and unlock together is how to actually speak the same language and solve a problem together. And so unlocking that, diversity is what allows us to solve hard problems, is what we spend a lot of our time trying to reach for.
I hesitate to make generalizations, but it does seem like there is some reluctance from women to talk about the work, because it feels like, oh, I'm sort of patting myself on the back for something I'm doing. But I think there is actually a need sometimes to bring attention to issues, to say, this is worth working on. And this is something that, that more people should get involved in. We think this topic is really important, or we think that this group is really great. How do you balance that sort of wanting to be anonymous versus wanting to highlight the work of your partners? Sort of where does the spotlight go, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, I will say on the sort of feeling comfortable sharing the good work, we're definitely living that, because CCI is 5 years old, and at the beginning I felt like I was like selling a dream, and I was like, we're just starting, this is what we want to do. 5 years in, we kind of have some successes under our belt that we can talk about and that we're excited about, so that transition feels good. And I will say that there might be some gender differences in willingness to sell a dream versus having something that you're actually ready to talk about and have done some work in. For us, it's incredibly important to actually demonstrate that we're part of a coalition, because we don't believe that any one group can solve the problems that we're working in. And building a coalition is incredibly important. One of the areas that I haven't really talked about is criminal justice reform that we're in. And I think it is so powerful right now that criminal justice reform is a human issue, and building a system that's just, keeps our communities safe, is something that we're all interested in. And what I harp for the team is that do not make this a partisan issue. This is an issue that we need to work on from the left, from the right. If you have no affiliation, all the better. Our religious communities, advocacy communities, let's get together, because the strength of these movements is dependent on how big the movement is. And that's resilience. And so that's incredibly important to us. But, we also have a responsibility to shine a light on exactly what you said, on the issues that people aren't paying attention to. And so we do use that power, but we want to do it in partnership with others.
Yeah, and I think if there's one thing that's actually really exciting about philanthropy as compared to business is that you're working with smart people, but not in competition. You're working in cooperation. So you can lean on each other for, say, like, oh, you've worked on criminal justice for a long time. You know, what do you think about this? Or this other person, well, they've really been in climate for a long time. I can ask them about that. And so there's this really nice sense of cooperation and collaboration that happens in philanthropy. Are there other organizations that you work with a lot? You find yourself with certain people a lot?
Let's see. Well, I mean, exactly what you're just talking about, the Arnolds have been in criminal justice reform for far longer than we have. And so it's always good to get their take on what's going on. The Gates Foundation has phenomenal strength internationally, whereas we don't. And so, when we built the precursor to the tool that I talked about, Aspen, it was called IDSeek, and we were helping international labs get set up to be able to understand genetic sequences and matching of different pathogens and the unknown pathogens in their community. We built the software, and they partnered on the ground with different departments of public health, different labs, because they had those relationships. And so that's, to me, a really good example of like, okay, here's what I can do, but it only gets us like a third of the way. Like, what can we do together to actually put this program together in a meaningful way? So we're always looking for those skill sets coming together across organizations.
And I think we're about to wrap up, but I'm just gonna say one last thing. What have you learned in your time, the last 5 years, that you wish you'd known at the beginning, or what do you wish that people would ask you about this this work that no one seems to ever ask? Choose one of those.
I have to say, before this job, I had just finished residency, got my first job as a professor in pediatrics at UCSF. And that was my life. And pivoting to be a founder of a new organization, I was still in student mode. And I was like, okay, like I've gotta like do deep research, like build up, figure out what the research literature base, the meta-analysis of the answer to this question. And what I've realized over time is to be the leader is to make the hard decisions. There's not going to be a deep, literature search that's going to be available. And decisions are imperfect, and you must make trade-offs. And no singular organization is perfect, but you get to shape it with the set of trade-offs that are and priorities that are important to you as an organization. And being clear about that is probably the most important part of my job. So it's been a wild learning journey. But I like it more every day. So that's good.
That is good. Thank you so much, Priscilla Chan. Thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share.
Now we invite you to take a brief break. Join us for a breathing, stretching, and movement session led by Jessamine Stanley, a yoga instructor and body liberation advocate.
What's good, y'all? My name's Jessamine Stanley, and I'm the co-founder of The Underbelly and We Go High. And let's just take a breath together. Let's take a moment and pause. So go ahead and close your eyes. You can put your feet on the ground. You can lie down on your back, whatever feels good to you. Just let yourself fall apart here. Every piece of yourself can be here. Your eyes are closed. Relax your eyelids, relax that space in between your eyebrows, relax the space in between each of your eyelashes. And just start to notice your breath. Notice the way it moves through your body. Notice the thoughts and feelings that come up for you. Notice them, but stay only in the noticing. Don't try to change anything. And then when you're ready, just gently blink your eyes open. You'll find everything exactly where you started. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Jessamine. Now we'll focus on a fundamental part of the business world, the workers themselves. The pandemic exposed a lack of fair wages, protections, and safety net resources for millions of American workers. You're about to hear how labor leaders across industries are working to reshape the fight for workers' rights. Mary Kay Henry is the international president of the Service Employees International Union, which has almost 2 million members across 100 different occupations. Saru Jayaraman is the president and co-founder of One Fair Wage, which works to improve wages and conditions in the service sector. She's also the director of the Food Labor Research Center at the University of California, Berkeley. Sarah Nelson has served as the international president of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, and has been called America's most powerful flight attendant by the New York Times.
Thanks, Emily. I'm Shafali Luthra, the healthcare reporter for the 19th, and I'm so excited to be with you all. And I first want to say thank you to our panelists for being here today. I think this is going to be a really great conversation on how labor leaders across industries are working to reshape the fight for workers' rights. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that Tina Chen, the president of Time's Up, was originally supposed to be part of today's labor discussion. In light of recent reports from the New York Attorney General's office regarding her Time's Up Legal Defense Fund co-founder Roberta Kaplan's role advising Governor Andrew Cuomo regarding claims of sexual misconduct, Chen is not participating today. Mary Kay, Sarah, Saru, I think this is going to be a really good conversation, and I will direct questions to each of you, but please, throughout this talk, jump in when you have something to add, even if I didn't directly address the question to you. And I want to start thinking about the past year, right, and the pandemic, which we know exposed really tremendous vulnerabilities and inequities for workers, and in particular women, right? We saw a lack of fair wages, protections, safety net resources, and we saw women leave the workforce at a much higher rate than men. And Mary Kay, I'd like to start with you. Could you take us back to the beginning, and what were some of the biggest issues for workers you represent, especially in the healthcare industry?
I'm sure this is true for you and Saru and Sarah. When you have me go back to the beginning, all I can think of is the panic and franticness that was rippling across service and care workers all across the economy who were on the front lines of this pandemic and were dealing with a crisis long before the public health crisis hit. And we had major loss of work in the airline sector that Sarah knows way better than me. Immediately upon the pandemic, as airlines started stopping flights, as the stay-at-home orders began, I started receiving daily calls about a security officer in Seattle who had been helping patients get in and out of wheelchairs in the driveway, who was never masked, getting COVID and dying. That was followed by nursing home workers who were being exposed, infected, actually not quite understanding what was unfolding in February initially, getting infected, taking the infection home to multi-generational households where a mom would get sick and die, and nursing home workers feeling like they had killed their mothers, to home care providers who were left on their own to get their own masks and drive from dollar store to dollar store to equip themselves to stay safe, also losing hours, and the government being very slow to respond, as you know, and the federal government refusing to take any responsibility and actually causing more death and infection as a result of their corrupt response to a global pandemic. And so those are the things that come into my mind, and it's why, together with many leaders like Saru and Sarah, we launched Protect All Workers. We wanted to make a set of health and safety demands, wage demands, and tackling structural inequality on race, gender, and economy that existed long before the pandemic, and call on our government and major corporations to provide personal protective equipment, health and safety protocols, and all the things that workers needed and that most never got throughout the whole first year of the pandemic.
Before I jump to the next question, I want to quickly follow up there. You spoke a bit, right, about what the response looked like under the previous administration. Did things change, and what changed with the Joe Biden presidency? And are there issues that you still think do need to be addressed with protecting workers?
Well, I don't know if Sarah wants to begin, because there was a huge breakthrough in the CARES Act under the previous administration that she was a key leader in making happen for the whole airline sector. And that's not to be skipped over, I think. And then together with Saru and others, we can talk about there's been a sea change, because we now have a national leader, a president that actually does want to coordinate nationally. And the resistance now is from governors who refuse to accept responsibility for the health and well-being of everybody in our nation.
Absolutely, Mary Kay, couldn't agree more. And actually, it's very difficult to compare the two administrations when you talk about the response, because what should have been happening from the very, very beginning is an outlook on what's happening around the world. Typically, our government would be constantly reviewing the potential for a communicable disease outbreak. And typically in aviation, we would be some of the first to get some of that information. Certainly in the healthcare industry, but oftentimes transportation is the way that these viruses are spread. So I will tell you right off the bat, when we were flying to China, actually, and we started to hear about this in December of 2019, before most of the public had ever heard anything about it, we were negotiating right away, or pressing our airline right away, to have the proper protective equipment on the planes, because it's not as if this was the first time we had ever experienced communicable disease before. And our role in trying to stop the spread of it in transportation, we've always taken that very, very seriously. And actually, through our union, we fought very hard to finally get OSHA protections on the airplane just 10 years ago, when we were exempted from OSHA when it was first created. So with that, we finally got training around how to protect yourself from the spread of communicable disease and bloodborne pathogens. And that training was critical for flight attendants to be taking actions on their own, the best possible actions to try to protect themselves. And actually, I think that we had a much lower infection rate right off the bat, simply because flight attendants went into this with better information about how to address this and how to protect themselves. But we were not getting any information like we typically would have gotten from our government. Typically, the government is working with us immediately and getting that out to all of us. So we did have PPE provided on the flights that were clearly identified as coming from a hotspot early on. But very, very quickly, that changed when this became community spread in the United States, and all of a sudden we didn't have proper PPE for even our healthcare professionals. We didn't even think that we could ask for it anymore as flight attendants. But the other thing that happened so fast, as Mary Kay was stating, is that there was such a change. There was such it felt like an overnight change here in the United States. It shouldn't have felt that way if we had had a proper administration running, but it was. We were taking on this wave of the reality that we already had community spread. There was no warning for this. It was just in our communities, and I just remember thinking that in a 48-hour period, all of a sudden San Francisco was shut down. I mean, when 48 hours earlier, if you had told people you have to stay in your homes and you can't go out and there's a curfew and all of these things, no way, right? But we were suddenly faced with the dangers. And then at that point, air travel dropped by 97%. And immediately, as Mary Kay was referring to, the first people to take the hit on that were the contract workers, because it was easy for airlines to shed that cost right away. And they love that structure, so that they don't have any long-term responsibility for those people. And so oftentimes those were women or people of color right away who were affected in that way. Flight attendants were also affected, and we're, of course, high density of women in the workforce and LGBTQ. And we, through the series of the bankruptcies, even though we had fought so hard to make this job a career over the years, and put a cap on hours so that we could actually raise the pay scale and not have to work more to make more, but earn more for the value of our work. During those bankruptcies, we took cuts in pay from 30 to 40%. So flight attendants across the industry, and this was true for all the other work groups as well in aviation, much like any other industry, agreed to lift those caps. And then the focus became on overtime hours. And so when that happens and we give all that productivity to industry, which we have over the last 40 years in this country, then when there's a crisis, and they simply are required to cover your basic paycheck, flight attendants right away were taking a 25 to 50% pay cut. And this happened across the country because all of that extra productivity, those overtime hours that many businesses will count on to run their operation, they could simply cut, and most contracts didn't even say that you have to pay for that, right? So it was an overnight cut. And we saw this coming. We also had experienced 9/11. We took our experiences from 9/11, as Mary Kay was referencing before, and we put forward a program called the Payroll Support Program that we had hoped would be used as a template for every other industry. And I just really want to emphasize the fact that we are 80% union in the airline industry, and it was through that power of that union density and workers that we were able to achieve something, even with Trump in the White House and McConnell controlling the Senate. And so what that program did was it ensured that people would continue to get a paycheck, even though it was at that minimum rate, that they would continue to have their health care, all of their retirement contributions. We would continue paying taxes, which supported the local tax base, of course, very, very important during this time, and continue to pay into Social Security, all the other social programs, and not put a greater burden on these social safety nets that were supposed to be there in place for people who were out of work. So this program really worked. And the other thing that we did while we had the leverage was we required the CEOs of the industry to agree to cap their own pay and that of the rest of the management structure, and to ban stock buybacks as well. So, so we did use that, and again, we had hoped that that would be a template for every other industry. It didn't turn out that way, but we would hope that this is the way that we would shape any kind of relief going forward, and think about it how we're shaping our economy going forward, lifting it from the ground up rather than this false idea of trickle down.
Sir, I want to give you a chance to weigh in also, and I'd love to hear a bit about the problems in particular that tipped and sub-minimum wage workers faced over the past year and a half.
Yeah, thank you so much for including me. It's so great to be with Mary Kay and Sarah. Yeah, it's been an extraordinary year and a half for everybody, and also for the restaurant industry. It's blown up. As you mentioned, and as Mary Kay mentioned, these were issues that existed long before the pandemic. In our case, frankly, have existed since emancipation of slavery, when the restaurant industry first demanded the right to hire newly freed slaves, not pay them anything at all, and have them live entirely on tips rather than getting a wage with tips on top, as tips were always intended to be. So we mutated the notion of tipping in this country from being an extra on top of a wage to becoming a replacement for wages, because we devalued Black life in this country. There's no other way to understand it. And also because we devalued women's work. These were mostly Black women working as restaurant workers, living off of tips. So we went from a $0 wage for tipped workers at emancipation that became law in 1938 as part of the New Deal, when everybody got the right to the minimum wage for the first time, except for millions of Black workers, farm workers, domestic workers, tipped restaurant workers, who were told you get a $0 wage as long as tips bring you to the full minimum wage. And we went from zero in 1938 up to $2.13 an hour, the current federal minimum wage for tipped workers. And so we have to understand, even before you asked me about the pandemic, like Mary Kay said, a $2 wage was a crisis, frankly, for generations prior to the pandemic. I mean, I am, in our membership, we have women who are 2 generations of women living on $2, mothers and daughters, all of whom work their entire careers on a $2 wage, living off of tips, struggling with 3 times the poverty rate of other workers, and suffering from the highest rates of sexual harassment of any industry because they have to put up with so much to get those tips. So that power dynamic between women servers and male customers, this is a nearly 70% female industry of tipped workers, that power dynamic got so much worse with the pandemic. With the pandemic, 1 in 4 Americans who lost their jobs with the pandemic worked in the restaurant industry. Nearly 6 million workers lost their jobs in the restaurant industry. And we 250,000 workers came to us for relief, near 250,000 workers. And of that, 2/3, 63% said that they couldn't get unemployment insurance because in most states they were told that their sub minimum wage of $2 or whatever it is, it's under $5 in 40 states, whatever it is in their state was too low to qualify for benefits. So it's such a insane and horrific moment when on the one hand, you have people saying, oh, these people are lazy, staying home, collecting unemployment insurance. That's why they don't want to go back to work in restaurants. When 2/3 of workers said they never got unemployment insurance because their wages were too low. And then they were forced to go back to work before they felt safe. UCSF named restaurants the most dangerous place to work during the pandemic. And what they told us, what they found was that tips were down. Tips were down 50 to 75%. And of course, health risks, hostility, and sexual harassment were way up, with thousands of women telling us that they were repeatedly asked, take off your mask so I can see how cute you are before I decide how much to tip you. Take off your mask so I can see the pretty face of my server before I decide how much I want to tip. So many women told us that over such a long period. It's still happening now that we coined a phrase for it. We're calling it masculine harassment, because it's basically women being asked to expose themselves, and as Mary Kay said, their family, their children, their parents, to the virus for the chance, not even to get their income, for the chance that a man might tip them, for that opportunity to get tipped. And so as a result of that horrific situation, millions of workers left this industry last year itself. We've been screaming for a year and a half. People are leaving. People are leaving. It's a mass exodus from this industry. People are leaving. It's not adding up anymore. People are saying it costs me more in transportation and childcare to get to work than I get in wages and tips when I get there. It's not worth it to risk my life and to put up with this kind of crap, excuse my language, for a $2 wage and the possibility of tips. So this year, what happened was that when governors finally said to restaurants, you can fully reopen, restaurants found that what we had been saying for a year was true. They didn't have enough people. In fact, this is such a mass, we're calling it a wage shortage, not a labor shortage, not a staffing shortage. It's a wage shortage. That's what it is. It's workers saying we won't go back for a sub-minimum wage. And so we did a survey about 3,000 workers a few months ago. 53% of those who remain in the restaurant industry say they're leaving. More than half of the workers who are currently in the industry say they're leaving. 78% say the only thing that would make them stay in restaurants is a full livable wage with tips on top. And then we went ahead and said, okay, you say it's unemployment insurance. You think that's going to be effective in getting people to go back to work, cut it off. So we looked at specifically at the states that have prematurely cut off unemployment insurance. Whereas 53% of all workers said they're leaving the industry, 57% of workers in states that prematurely cut unemployment insurance said we're not coming back, we're leaving, we're not coming back to restaurants. And 80% said the only thing that will make me come back is a full livable wage with tips on top. So listen, to your question about whether things have changed, of course they've changed. We have a president who has not only made it his campaign platform, put it in his first bill to raise the minimum wage and to eliminate the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, but I do have to say, we do have to understand that for these workers, nothing yet has changed. There's this promise, there's this hope, there's potential, and as Mary Kay said, there's an administration we can work with, but we've got to work together with this administration and Congress to raise this freaking wage. Otherwise, we will not be able to experience the restaurant industry, the hospitality sector, or the service sector that we had prior to the pandemic. Listen, if half of the workers are leaving, we basically have two choices: either raise the wage or expect half the restaurant industry that we had prior to the pandemic.
I do want to go back as well to the point you made about workplace sexual harassment, right? Because it's endemic and it's important. And what I'm wondering is, are there any efforts underway, any organizing to try to demand a safer workplace? And what does that look like?
You're asking me first, and then I'd love to hear what Sarah and Mary Kay have to say as well. Absolutely. I mean, I have never in my 20 years of working, or 25 at this point, I've never seen workers and women in particular so fed up and willing to fight and to organize. Never. I mean, they are coming out of the woodwork. They are demanding livable wages, and they are, I think something happened over the last year where really a light bulb went off for a lot of workers, that if the state is telling me my wages are too low to qualify for benefits, probably I should not accept these wages. One. And two, if men are saying to me, I have to kill myself essentially to get a tip, then this system is dysfunctional. It's not working. And I will not put up with it. And so, we can talk about protections, but what we know with sexual harassment is that fundamentally it comes down to the power that women have in the workplace. You can institute all the different safeguards. You can set up a legal defense fund. You can do all of those things, but those are after the fact. If you want to stop the harassment from happening in the first place, in our industry, it is now irrefutable that the way to do it is to pay people an actual wage so that they don't have to put up with, they're not as dependent on the tips. They don't have to take off their mask. Look, there are 7 states that have a full minimum wage with tips on top, including where I live in California. We have 1/2 the rate of harassment. And we've been working with Professor Catherine McKinnon, who's the legendary legal scholar who coined the term sexual harassment. She has said, working with us on these issues, she has said, listen, there is no policy more effective in curbing sexual harassment, she has said, she has seen in any industry, than providing a full livable wage and the power to, speak up. Frankly, she said it's been more effective than naming sexual harassment as illegal, which has been her life's work. So, the lawyers will tell you we need to have, litigation and we need to have legal defense. And I think we as organizers will tell you, no, we need power. We need power on the job, and that includes a livable wage, and that will prevent the harassment from happening in the first place.
I completely agree with Saru, and we are backing hundreds of fast food women who have been joining together to demand McDonald's, Wendy's, and Burger King recognize a union and end the systemic sexual assault and harassment that occurs in every store across the nation. And they've done everything that the Time's Up movement has requested. They have a zero tolerance policy. They're doing training. They have a 1-800 number. And because women have no power, and because they're earning $7.25 an hour in most states, and in some states, even at 15, they still have a schedule that's inhumane and don't have enough hours to feed themselves and their families, and therefore are subjected to horrible treatment and harassment. And I agree with Saru. I think workers are joining together in record numbers and have said enough is enough. You're calling us essential, but treating us as disposable, and we're done with it. We're going to join together and demand recognition of our organizations, our unions, and a living wage.
There's definitely a solidarity of shared experience here through this pandemic that has joined people together like never before. Even though the pandemic had us isolate, people are seeing that the experience is very much the same across jobs, across industries. What I would say is, thank goodness for the Me Too movement. When that broke, that gave us a new opportunity to be able to talk about this in a different way, not as victims, but as women who were going to look out for each other and take care of each other. I think about the pioneers of my union who formed the union in 1945, and it was really about taking on these very specific issues. The first thing they did was negotiate a seniority list, and the biggest reason they did that was to stop managers from trying to exploit flight attendants and get them to trade sex for schedules. So, this is something that we have been dealing with our entire careers. And as Sarah was talking about all the conditions that take place with tipped workers, as I said, we lifted those caps on the number of hours that we could work, and that made people work more to make more. One of the things that the airlines tried to do during that time was to introduce tips into our workplace. And we fought very hard against that because we knew that even though they were trying to promote this as a good thing, as a way for flight attendants to make more money, we knew what they were really trying to do was to stop the pressure from flight attendants coming together to demand a higher wage, a living wage. And so those dynamics are just unacceptable. And everyone who goes to work should expect as a baseline a living wage. And so we're gonna band together further from here and use this experience together. And I think like never before, we really have the ability to use the power of women looking out for each other, standing up together, and identifying what those demands are together.
Sarah, I want to ask you also a little bit about, in particular, harassment and unruly behavior on flights, right? And we had that incident a few weeks ago with the passenger on the Frontier flight, right, who had to be subdued, inappropriately touched 2 women flight attendants, punched a man. Can you talk a bit about what kinds of protections the union is fighting for and what you'll continue to fight for?
Sure. Well, immediately, let's recognize that our staffing is down to minimum levels. And so one of the first demands that we have is to increase staffing. That's going to take a lot of work to do that. And we're attacking it on many different fronts. Those flight attendants on that Frontier flight did not even have the basic security tools that many other flight attendants have at other airlines. They didn't have anything but duct tape. And so there was a lot of discussion about why was this man duct taped to his seat? That's all they had. So they used the tools that they had on hand. And when they landed, instead of getting support from the airline, they were told that they were being suspended and under investigation and potentially fired. And so our union fired back and made it very public and said that if Frontier doesn't reverse course, that flight attendants are not going to feel safe to come to work at Frontier and maybe anywhere. Because if we're sending this signal when we've got this epidemic going on of this violence on our planes, and I should say in the last 6 months, 1 in 5 flight attendants say that they have experienced a physical incident of harassment on the plane. So it's really out of control. But we got Frontier to reverse course immediately within a couple hours, and they are now being supported. They're being paid. They're on an administrative leave so that they can recover and so that they can actually press charges against this guy as well. But that's because we had that support together to be able to fire back at the airline and protect each other through that solidarity and support among sisters and brothers. But so we are continuing to demand that flight attendants have proper training. We have a self-defense training class that was created after 9/11. That was mandatory according to Congress. That was changed into a voluntary program with the Bush administration and pressed for by Continental Airlines because they didn't want to pay for it. So we continue to charge forward to try to make this a program that is paid, but we continue to get funding from the government, at least to have the voluntary program. So flight attendants are signing up for that program in droves. And we are just interfacing with the federal government using every bit of power that we have. I'm happy to say that the FAA has been very responsive, and they sent new guidance to the airports this week about law enforcement doing a better job of responding, about restaurants and bars helping to watch for the alcohol intake before people are getting on planes. So we're taking a look at this every way we can, and we're also pressing the DOJ to make sure that they are prosecuting, because long ago we won penalties up to 20 years in prison if you are interfering or assaulting a flight crew member. So if DOJ would prosecute very publicly, we believe there would be some sobering up across the board.
Are these protections? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to add in on customer hostility, but go ahead if you wanted to ask more on that.
Oh, no, I was going to ask if these protections will extend beyond this immediate crisis.
Absolutely. So these would be, we're asking for these to be in place, forever. And Sarah is about to speak, and I can't wait to hear what she has to say. I want to note that we're very aware that this is on the evening news every night with what flight attendants are facing. But really, that's because the airline industry gets so much coverage, and also because people recognize that that's an enclosed space where you can't go anywhere. So I think it gets a little more attention. But the stories that are not being told is that workers who have been essential through this entire pandemic are facing this everywhere on the job. And I'm going to let Sarah speak to that, but we're very aware of that.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's so true. I mean, the level of hostility in all customer service, I'm sure Mary Kay can share as well, is so high. And it's only going to get worse. I think a lot of people believe, oh, things are going to keel, it's going to become even keeled. We're going to, come out of this pandemic and things are going to calm down. I think what people aren't understanding, at least in our sector, is, we're so massively understaffed right now. And the level of hostility that workers were already facing during the pandemic, take off your mask, I want to see how cute you are, is only getting worse because customers are getting more and more irate that their food is taking longer to get to the table, that their servers can't interact with them as much as they could before, because they're understaffed. They're working for those that are left in the industry, they're working ridiculous hours for very little pay and not able to provide the level of quick response that we expect in the restaurant industry. And so it's only going to get worse. But I did want to give one kind of silver lining, at least that we've seen, which is, again, this is a reason that so many millions of workers are leaving this industry, is because they're just done with the low tips, low wages, high levels of hostility. And that has resulted in literally thousands of independent small business restaurant owners voluntarily raising their wages. In part, yes, because they can't get workers to come back without it, but also in part, we've heard from a lot of employers who've said, oh my God, I am seeing the level of again, I'm going to use the word, I'm sorry, crap that our workers are putting up with. And I have put them in this terrible situation because they're having to get tips from the very same people that they're trying to enforce social distancing and mask rules. It's an impossible situation. How are you going to say, stay safe, follow the rules, and at the same time, give me your tip? It is an impossible situation. And so I do think there's a way in which we can really build on the leverage of the moment, both the low wages and the high levels of hostility. And like Sarah did with the airline, I mean, really win higher wages and better protections for all if we band together and demand it.
I do want to talk as well about this nascent, or I guess no longer nascent, phase of the pandemic that we're in right now, right? With the Delta variant surging across the country and cases up, hospitalizations up, mask mandates coming back, and in some workplaces, right, vaccine mandates. And there's a bunch we can talk about, but Mary Kate, maybe let's start with how are healthcare workers feeling about this after all that we've been through? How do you sort of think through caring for folks who haven't been vaccinated, and does this new pandemic phase change the conversation between workers and employers?
Yes, and I would say hospital workers on the front lines of the pandemic that are in ICUs and ERs and in hospital settings feel like they fought a war last year and are dealing with a lot of post-traumatic stress. Walking by an ER desk where they used to say hello to the same person for 15 years who got infected and died of COVID, and there's a daily reminder of the price that healthcare workers have paid during the pandemic. That's one. Two, employers have very unevenly responded. And again, because we weren't able to do what Sarah said, which is take the airline standard, which would have been incredible, and apply that across the whole US economy. Unionized hospital workers had a voice and were able to negotiate terms and conditions on safety that non-union hospital workers were not. And the industry is only 10% union. And so corporate greed in the hospital sector kind of ruled the day in shortcuts on staffing, shortcuts on health and safety. and dealing with a political environment where Florida and Texas governors are preventing public health, where California, Washington, New York, Illinois, we're trying to help enforce public health together with the healthcare sector. So that's one set. In nursing homes, you know that over 50% of the deaths that we experienced last year occurred either from the frontline staff in nursing homes or from elders. But when nursing homes were union, it was 30% less death and infection because workers had a way to demand what they needed and bargain over it. And so we have non-union nursing home owners now wanting the union to come and do education and training of their workforce so that people will trust getting vaccinated, because workers don't trust what their employer wants and don't have a complete trust in the government. And the union becomes a trusted messenger in culturally competent vaccine education awareness, which we've done in close to 22 different languages in parts of the country all over the nation. And so that's one scan. I would say home care providers had the same experience as restaurant workers, weren't eligible for unemployment, couldn't get access to PPE, are excluded from minimum wage increases because of that racist exclusion that Saru spoke about. And they particularly continued to volunteer their time with elders who they didn't want to have be left alone, but have paid a tremendous economic price. And now I would say it has unleashed a number of healthcare workers in every one of those sectors who want to join together and demand a union so they can bargain a better life. We had several nursing homes where people walked off the job and the employer recognized the union as a way to get people to return to work. And I don't think that's happened. I kept dreaming that it would happen in the hundreds. It happened in the dozens. But it's just an indication of how much people have had it and how much folks want a way for us to have a unified response in this nation and for this nation to help the rest of the world get access and to free vaccines. What we've done for our population, our nation needs to help do for people all around the world because we represent people in the service and care sector, many of whom are immigrant or first generation immigrant that want to make sure their loved ones from their home countries are cared for too.
So I want to really recognize what Mary Kay's union did there in providing training. I mean, think about the service that gives to the community. And what's really amazing about it is we actually had outreach from nursing homes as well, saying that they knew that flight attendants didn't have work and could they come and work in nursing homes. And it was the only outreach that we actually had from the Trump administration, both Elaine Chao and HHS reaching out to ask us if we could put together a program. We put this out to flight attendants, and overnight we had thousands of flight attendants volunteering to say, yes, I'm very interested. I'd like to help out. And the reason that it never came together is because these nursing homes have been bought up by hedge funds, and they have extracted so much of the revenue from those nursing homes so that there's nothing left. There's low wage workers, there's no union there. And here they are coming, it was very ironic. They're coming to the union for help, Mary Kay's union too, my union, and seeing that we could help them. And yet, we couldn't agree to do this program because they couldn't confirm for us that they would actually be able to provide the PPE for the flight attendants to do the work. And so we couldn't put our union stamp on that. We couldn't send our members into that. And they also required that the flight attendants would take the liability if anyone was hurt because these hedge funds wouldn't back that. So, I mean, this is a really screwed up system. I don't want to take a lot more time, but you know, this is what we're dealing with. And if we had the unions there all the time, when it was in crisis and they recognized they needed our help and our expertise, they asked for it. And these are the same people who have fought against it normally to try to keep control. But in a crisis, it was all falling apart, and people are seeing that and banding together now, as we were talking about, to demand better and to organize.
I'm really struck by something Mary Kay alluded to earlier, which is the role of unions in vaccine education. And we know right from polling that when a workplace requires vaccination, that does increase uptake. Is there a role for unions in helping boost vaccination rates? And what does that look like? And how do we think about the vaccine mandate conversation in this context?
Well, the first phase of it was to demand free and equitable access for every community in order to get to universal vaccination. And I would say we just hit that in the June, July period in our nation, where every community had equal access. And there are still some pockets in communities where on Native American reservations or in key communities that are monolingual, are we doing enough to get to that community? That's one. Two, all of us are bargaining with our employers right now on how to increase the vaccination rates. And some states, as you know, are already moving to mandating vaccination in key sectors of the economy. So we're bargaining over that to make sure people's rights are protected, but also trying to advocate for universal vaccination. So I think we do have a major role to play, but I think it's combined with what Sarah just said. Our government and major corporations have to understand the value of more working people being in unions as a way to promote fairness and equity across the economy, which we just witnessed in this pandemic, that many workers who were applauded and treated as essential were considered disposable. And each of us has horror stories to tell about it, especially for non-union workers. And I think that's a key takeaway for me from this last 15 months, is that we have to much more aggressively demand every dollar from our government that is going to create new jobs has to require that employers allow workers to decide for themselves whether they want to join together in a union, and insist on the $15 minimum living wage, in eliminating the sub-minimum wage, and being able to bargain up from that is a key factor in being able to engage the crushing of the virus together as a nation. And I think we also have to assume responsibility for the world. The variants are going to continue to incubate if we can't figure out, given our wealth, together with other wealthy countries, how to create more equitable distribution on every continent in the globe.
We're not a union, we're a worker organization, but I just want to applaud what Mary Kay said and share a very quick anecdote. I just got an email yesterday or the day before from a worker in Florida who said, you know, is there anything you can do to help me? My employer is mandating that all of us vaccinate and I don't like it. And you know, on its surface, you might read that and say, oh, what's wrong with this worker? Why can't they understand they should get vaccinated? But if you kept reading the email, she said, my employer didn't provide us with masks, never cared about our safety, made us take off our masks if the customers asked, you know, enforced no regulations whatsoever, put us on the front lines, making us enforce the regulations, and didn't do anything if the customers didn't follow. And he pays me $5 an hour. And so there is such a level of distrust. And you know, she's in Florida. She's hearing from her governor and everybody around her that the vaccines are bad. And in some ways, her experience of her employer and what the government has done for her matches the idea that nobody's in it for her. Nobody's out there to protect her. So she reached out to us, and we're talking to her. We're talking to her about why getting vaccinated is a good thing, but we're also talking about organizing her workplace so that she can demand a higher wage and all the protection she needs. And that's critical. But like Mary Kay said, it's got to be everybody working together, because we can only do so much. Ultimately, her and her coworkers are not going to trust any employer or the government unless they see that change is coming, that wages are going to go up, that workers are actually recognized as the essential workers that they are. And ultimately, that is actually not partisan. We've had a lot of MAGA folks even join rallies with us saying, yeah, we agree, we need a higher wage, because ultimately there is I think, a universal understanding that wages are too low. And that is why so many people are, even employers have joined, small business employers have joined with us to say, we're raising our wages, but workers still won't come because they don't trust that these changes are permanent, that these changes are real. And so that is why we need policy intervention. We need Congress and the administration to deliver on, as much as we're calling for everybody to get vaccinated, we also need to deliver on higher wages. And like Mary Kay said, the support to get unionized.
Before we wrap up, I want to go around with one fun question. I see two of you have bookshelves in your backgrounds. So if each of you could tell me one book you read in the last year that you'd absolutely recommend to our audience, what would it be? And very quickly, why? And Sarah, if you want, you can go first.
Oh, well, lucky me. Behind me, you will see the 50-year anniversary of strike. This is a great history of labor and the power that we have together when we recognize that, the pitfalls of that when we have just allowed the strike to be talked about as just confrontational, but rather about the power that workers have to change their conditions. And I would say, that is a great awakening for raising expectations, for understanding past mistakes, and understanding that the strike is a tactic, solidarity is our power. And so you have to also be strategic about it. But the book gives all of that and gives great labor history too. And what we have talked about, just on the counter of what Naru was just talking about with the vaccine, at United Airlines, where we did all those things, where we negotiated incentives, where we had clinics with the company, where we did all those things along the way, once the company announced the mandate, people went along with it because that trust was there, because we had done all those things along the way, because the union was there. So I recommend Strike by Jeremy Recker. Thank you.
Mary Kay, what about you?
This isn't fun as much, but the book that I've really been moved by reading is The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. And she worked with some of our Fight for 15 leaders in relationship, and there's the beginning of a chapter about one of our white women leaders who talks about her awakening of the intersection of racial and economic justice through the Fight for 15, where she understood that Black and brown workers in her store were not treated as well as she was treated, but that the reason her wages remained low is because they hadn't figured out how to join together across race to make the demand, and that she as a white woman was going to finally object when she saw the ongoing targeted harassment of Black and brown workers in her store in Kansas City. And so I have to tell you, that's been something that I've witnessed in the pandemic, because our Black, brown, and Asian members have disproportionately been hit, as we know from the larger data of infection and death, and the sort of community grief that we're holding. I think there's huge healing and hope in the work that people are doing to fight together, to both uproot systemic racism and to end corporate greed, and create jobs that people can be proud of raising their families on and expect their kids are going to do better. And that book kind of summarized that, both the problem and the solution, in a way that I found very hopeful.
That sounds wonderful. Saru, what about you?
Well, Mary Kay took mine. I actually pulled out.
Saru! I know.
I know. Think alike. So since the book I read has already been mentioned and Mary Kay did such an eloquent job describing, I'm not going to talk more about it. I guess I'll just do a shameless plug. I have a book coming out in a few months called One Fair Wage, Ending Sub-Minimum Pay in America with New Press. And it actually is not just about restaurant workers. It's all sub-minimum wage workers, restaurant, nail salon, car wash, gig workers, workers with disabilities, incarcerated workers, and youth. And it really is about how we as a country if we if we are allowing anybody to get some minimum pay, it's really honestly a reflection of our valuation of some people, women, people of color, people with disabilities, as less human than others, subhuman. And so it's time to end all sub minimum wages. It's time for a livable wage for all. After all, that was the idea of a minimum wage to begin with, a floor below which nobody should go, and certainly not essential workers.
Sorry, we can't wait for that. And we gotta lift the floor to raise the roof, right?
That's right. That's right. That's great. Thank you.
And
all.
Shefali, what's your book?
Oh boy. Mine is truly a fun book. It's called Real Life. It's a novel by Brandon Taylor. It is about a young Black gay man in a PhD program in the Midwest. And it is a few days in his life, and he is interrogating what it means to be a person. And I read it in January, and I've thought about it every week since.
Wow.
All of you, this was so great. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I've learned so much from all of you, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that terrific conversation. Gina Chavez is a queer, Catholic, and Latinx artist based in Austin, Texas, who was recently nominated for a Latin Grammy. Today, she performs her 2020 hit La Que Manda, which means the woman in charge, as well as her song Let It Out.
I'm so excited to be here with y'all for the 19th Represent Summit to share some music, including my song La Que Manda. I wrote this song about waking up to the power within me, a power that the world often tells people like myself, queer people, women, people of color, to be small, to be quiet. It tells us to squelch that voice inside of us. And I say no more. I dedicate this song to all of the now and future trailblazers out there. Let's go, y'all. La Que Manda.
Que manda, ella manda. ¿Quién manda? Ella manda. Si alguien te pregunta de que yo soy la que manda. Ya camino donde quiero y a mi propio ritmo voy. Si vienes bien, si no también soy feliz con lo que soy. Solía compararme con otros, solía temer las consecuencias, solía no creer en mí misma. Ahora soy un fuego abrasador. ¿Quién soy? Yo soy la que manda. ¿Quién soy? Yo soy la que manda. ¿Quién soy? Yo soy la que manda. Si alguien te pregunta, di que yo soy la que manda. ¿Quién soy? Yo soy la que manda. ¿Quién soy? Hey, soy la que manda. ¿Quién soy? Yo soy la que manda. Si alguien te pregunta, di que yo soy la que manda. How good is what you failing contra? Stop for the million voices, these walls don't get loud. Let it out, get down. Luna hiera serenade us now. Golden desert, you are like quiet while you sleep. Under a concrete cover, beautiful queen. Let it out, get down. Let freedom find you running in the rain. Been around the world, I've seen your eyes, your heavy hearts beat just like mine. These colors wait on you and me. There ain't no stopping us when there's a beat. Don't you sweat the light of you, you ain't got a thing to prove. Let it out, get down. There's nothing I know what to do. Shake the devil off your shoes. Let it out, get down. Dance. Come on, let it out. Come on, get down. Come on, let it out, get down. Dance. Come on, let it out. Come on, get down. Come on, let it out, get down. Dance. Drown the different sound in a silk melody. So you'll be shining bright like you love it. Let it out, get down. Give your doubting heart some room to breathe. Been around the world, I've seen your eyes, your heavy hearts beat just like mine. These colors wait on you and me. There ain't no stopping us when there's a beat. Don't you sweat the light of you, you ain't got a thing to prove. Let it out, get down, dance. Nothing I know what to do. Shake the devil off your shoes. Let it out, get down, dance. Come on, let it out. Come on, get down. Come on, let it out, get down, dance. Come on, let it out. Come on, get down. Come on, let it out, get down, dance. Woo! Sing whoa, your turn. Na 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 na. Sing whoa, na 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 na. Sing, come on, let it out. Come on, get down. Come on, let it out. Sing, hey! Here we go. Sono di pura vida, man. Swimming the Red Sea like a crab. Aquí se mettono a Merida, 1, 2, 3, 4 días. Santiago hasta San Marcán, Villa Rama, Fimushkira, Guatemala, Morelia, Buenos Aires, we gon' see ya. Let's go!
Thank you, Gina, for that moving performance, literally moving because I couldn't stay in my seat. Now, please welcome Barbara Clark, founder and president of our presenting sponsor, the Impact Seat, to introduce our next conversation.
Hello, I'm Barbara Clark, founder and president of the Impact Seat. We're honored to sponsor this year's 19th Represents Summit and be part of a community of some of the next generation's most brilliant founders and investors. At the Impact Seat, we know representation matters. We invest in ideas that solve the world's biggest problems, focusing on the most innovative, diverse early stage startups. Our approach combines advocacy, philanthropy, and investment to build a new and more equitable economy. I'm excited to introduce these incredibly accomplished founders and CEOs who've built and grown 2 innovative companies. We'll hear their take on what the business sector can do to support and fund leaders from historically excluded groups. I'm pleased to welcome Whitney Wolfe Herd, founder and CEO of Bumble, Beatrice B. Dixon, co-founder and CEO of the Honey Pot Company, and our moderator, Chabeli Carazana, the 19th economy reporter.
It's my pleasure today to be joined by 2 innovative leaders, Whitney Wolfe Herd at Bumble and Beatrice Dixon at the Honey Pot Company. Both of them have taken a journey to where they are right now in their careers that could help carve a path for many others that come after them. But as we often say here at the 19th, representation matters, but it does not equal access. The reality is, even as more efforts have tried to help more women join, be founders and get funding for their businesses, and particularly marginalized folks, they are still not given equitable access to funding and capital. Last year, startups were able to raise even more money than 2019, but only 2% of that funding went to women-owned businesses. And even as at a time when women-owned businesses, and particularly those owned by women of color, are among the fastest growing in our economy. Last year, the Honey Pot grew immensely. It's in Target, Whole Foods, Walmart, and retailers across the country. B is one of the first 40 women of color to raise more than $1 million. Whitney Wolfe Herd was able to take Bumble public, becoming the youngest woman to do that. And so both have seen a lot of success. And I think that behind some of that success is a conversation around power and acknowledging that we are in a society where women and marginalized folks don't often have the agency to be able to achieve what they can achieve, what they should be able to achieve. And so I wanted to start this conversation today talking about power, the power of being able to tell your own story, the power of being able to get buy-in for your product, the power of being able to build something that you believe in. And B, I know you have a very interesting story about how the Honey Pot came to be. You've told the idea about how the idea for your company came from a dream that you had. I think it was with your grandmother, right? Sort of the power of our ancestors. Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit about how you felt after that dream, how you perhaps were given the tools to maybe perhaps do something that could solve your issue in the moment, but could potentially help others, and how you decided to turn that into something that could create something greater?
Yes. So thank you so much, Chabeli, for the opportunity and for this conversation, and also to the 19th. Yeah, I mean, I think that all humans have power. And, it may not be recognized. It may be in a position where it's being diluted. Certain people are in terrible situations, but I think that we can always achieve, right? And that obviously is relative. But in my instance, I was working at Whole Foods. I had a small cleaning business. I was like an artist model. I was doing all kinds of things to survive. And around that time, I was also battling bacterial vaginosis, and nothing that I did worked. I went to the doctor, I took medicine, I was on Google. I mean, it was really bad. And one morning, my grandmother came to me in a dream and essentially told me that she had something that was going to solve my problem. We were sitting down at a table talking. She handed me a piece of paper and it had a list of ingredients on it. And she told me to memorize what was on the paper. And so I literally just kept repeating the ingredients over and over and over again until she told me to wake up. And when I woke up, I was still doing the same thing. And I kept pen and paper by my bed at that time. And so I wrote down essentially all the ingredients that I was remembering. And because I worked at Whole Foods at the time, you know, it gave me access to those ingredients. And so I went to work, and over the next couple of days, I bought said ingredients. You know, a couple of days went by, I made a formula. And it's crazy because 4 to 5 days of using that formula, everything that I was dealing with, because I had BV at that time, went away. And so, you know, to go back to what I was saying about every human having power, at that time, I didn't make a lot of money. I wasn't necessarily happy inside of my body, inside of my mind, you know, for many reasons, right? But something still said to me when I realized that this worked, literally in the same moment, I said, this is what I do now, right? Like, this is my job now. And so, you know, in that moment, I'm grateful that I made that decision, because that was like the first day of my life, you know, and the first day that I like realized some sort of power inside of myself, you know, to be able to be in that state, to be able to for my grandmother to travel through dimensions to find me, because my grandmother died when my mother was very young. You know, like I must have really been in a way, you know, for her to travel through all that. I don't even know what she had to do to get to me, you know? So, yeah.
Did you know it instantly that you were going to set out on this path, and knowing, you know, the challenges that were ahead, the hurdles that are ahead, there probably still are. There's, you know, it's very challenging to set off
more challenging.
I mean, did you know right away you were going to do that?
To be quite literal, yes, I did. Literally in the same moment, in the same breath, when I realized that wash that she had given me, the formulation that she had given me in a dream that I had ended up making had worked. Yes, I realized it. And to be honest, I never turned back, because here we still are.
Fantastic. I wanted to go back to the central idea of power and empowerment, what that looks like, and Bea shared a little bit about how she was empowered through her ancestors, through her family, to be able to do what she's been able to do with the honey pot. And I wanted to talk to you about the power of owning your story, Whitney. I know this is something that you've talked about before, how, you know, despite all of the success of Bumble, a lot of it was being framed around, you know, your experience at Tinder, the sexual harassment case at Tinder that you were involved with, and sort of this framing that I think a lot of women are probably very familiar with, which is their stories are framed around the men that are very tangentially a part of it. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you reframed that narrative, and how that is also the story of the success of Bumble. Those two things have, I think, a very parallel idea.
Well, first and foremost, I just wanted to say something I didn't get to say earlier. Bea, I'm very impressed with you. And I have to say, you and I might be soul sisters, because the name of your company, your name, Bea, and the yellow shirt you're wearing, you're literally the dream Bumble brand right there. So I just wanted to say that and say hi properly. And as far as, you know, the framing of how we all get here, again, it's very simple. I was frustrated with the way society operated. I was frustrated that, you know, no matter what I did, it was always back to the man. And back when I was, dating in relationships, it was always the man in control, right? And then I would look across even my LGBTQ plus community of friends, and I'll never forget this really unbelievable conversation once where someone said, I'm going to propose. And I said, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. And they said, yeah, because I'm the man in the relationship. And it was two women. And, this whole notion of women making the first move is so much more than just the straight woman making the first move. It's a shift in the way we think about power dynamics, control dynamics, and the fact that this dynamic of who's the male role, whether that's in the boardroom, and it goes beyond just gender. It's a mechanism of control and power and access. And so when starting Bumble, it was all just through the lens of, why are we assigned our place when it comes to relationships? Why do you wait for the man to open the door? Why is it you wait for control? You wait to be spoken to. You go back to these fairy tales we all grew up on, and it's so undermining to our power, our voices as women, no matter what background you're from as a woman. There's this universal sisterhood amongst women. And if you look at the way we've all been programmed, it's to basically give our power away at that very first hello. And so that was really the framing for Bumble, was how can we give women back control over their relationships? And how can you ever expect to see women in boardrooms or political stances of power if they're not even in power in their own relationships? And so that was really the framing of the whole thing.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So the next piece of that, sort of the practical piece of that, getting the funding, getting the company off the ground. I know that you got a $21,000 loan from your brother and co-founder, that you were working a full-time job while you were trying to get Honey Pot off the ground. And so can you talk about the hurdles that you had to overcome to get the funding that you needed, and what you still see as the really large hurdles ahead of women, people of color, non-binary folks, trans folks, any marginalized community, any person at the intersection of gender and race? What hurdles need to
Which is
come
every
down?
person.
Yeah.
Which is every person, right?
Yeah. What do you think are the fundamental things that need to change for folks like that to be able to get to places that you've been?
I think that we're in the change. I think that if it's in the cards for you and you work, and you keep your head down and you stay focused and you stay diligent, you make sure that you keep those opportunities open, you make sure that you're seeking them, you make sure that you're laser focused, you know what you want to do. I think that you'll get everything that you need, because that will be in order, right? Like Honey Pot didn't just start last year. Like we've been doing this since 2012, right? So like it's nearly 10 years. That's just how long it takes. People don't realize things like this don't happen overnight. It takes hustle, it takes grind, it takes focus, it takes grit, it takes like extreme optimism. It takes, running your own business. The belief that you have in it almost is religious. You understand what I'm saying? Like, because you think anybody who's religious, and I'm not saying that anybody that's watching this has to be religious, but when you think about religion and you think about belief, you're believing in something that you can't see. It's the same exact thing when you're running a company, right? I am of the opinion that there is enough money out here for everybody. I am under the opinion that things have changed for the better. Those statistics have gotten better. When you see funds like Goldman Sachs putting up $10 billion for, essentially BIPOC humans, right? And women and just humans. When you see something like that happen, a shift is happening. I mean, Goldman Sachs is the industry leader when you think of financing, when you think of business growth, right? So I think that the shift is happening. I just think that we just have to keep our eyes on the ball, because it can happen. When Honey Pot raised money for the first time, which was in what, 2016, 2017, like all these conversations weren't happening, and yet we were able to still raise some money. You understand what I'm saying? So it's I want to make sure that we are clear and that we are, as founders, are being responsible with our messages, that we as humans that are pontificating on these types of conversations are responsible with our words. And you know, so I'm not the person that you're going to hear talk about how things are not going well in these communities. I'm going to change that conversation and lift that vibration and say that things are moving, things are shifting. Zillions of these conversations are happening even in this very moment. There's a million conversations happening on Instagram, Clubhouse, Zooms. These types of things can't be conversed upon the way that they are, and there aren't shifts. So I think that the shift is here. But just because money's available, you still gotta grind, you still gotta hustle, you still gotta put your superhero hat on if you're leading your company. Don't be afraid when you get big opportunities. A lot of times people get big opportunities. Target comes knocking on their door. Walmart comes knocking on their door and they're like, oh, I'm not ready. I don't want to mess it up. Honestly, sometimes messing it up is thinking that you're not ready. Right? So, you know, take the opportunities when they present themselves. And also, don't think that just because you just started your company, now you need some money. I don't believe in that either. I think that you need money when you need money, when you are in a desperate situation. We needed money because we were going into Target. There was a light at the end of the tunnel, right? And so, you know, we knew that there was a destination. That makes it easy when you're raising capital, because now you got something to point to. When you don't have something to point to and you're just raising money because you think that that's what you're supposed to be doing, because that's what everybody's talking about, right? That's when you can end up putting yourself in a rough situation. So I think also waiting to raise money until you absolutely need it, you know, especially in this climate.
Whitney, I'm curious what you have to say about sort of your journey. You know, we were talking about financing has been a huge challenge, a huge hurdle. And obviously the work that you've been doing over many years, like the work that Bee has been doing over many years, has borne fruit. I'm curious what your thoughts are on, you know, someone who came from a little bit of more financially stable background. You had a big financial background at the beginning of Bumble. What advice you have for founders who are perhaps starting from a different place and wanting to overcome sort of some of those hurdles that are very real for a lot of women founders, to be able just to get, you know, the money to get started or to keep going if they're at a critical venture, you know, critical juncture like Bee was with Target, to be able to get to that next step?
Yeah, no, I think it's an incredible question, and it's nuanced, right? It's different for everyone. But I think something that I have seen over the years take place with women in particular is the willingness to give away more in exchange for any money, right? Because it feels so few and far between, that I've watched, you know, countless women come to me and they'll say, hey, I'm looking for investment, and I'll look at the cap table, and, you know, they will have taken a small amount of money from someone for a controlling stake. And I do believe that it's a bit of this psychological money guilt that women have been raised with, right? Like, well, we should be grateful for any money we can get, or you know, women have not been trained to never under any lens act greedy or act like they're in it for money, right? Because of the way women have always been labeled when there's any association with money. And so I think the beauty of this shift, and to your point earlier in what you were saying with Goldman, is that I think finally the investment community realizes that this is not a handout. This is not a favor, that this is literally the most lucrative opportunity for their investors and for their own return that they can find. I fundamentally believe that women build companies with purpose. They build solutions to their problems. And those are hands down the best businesses on planet Earth. And I think we've started to see a lot of that come into shape. And I'll never forget when I was, 24, recently 25, starting Bumble. I was very fortunate that I had some, what would you call it? I guess I had some credit behind me because of my time at the former company. And so there was some trust, but even all the no's I got during that time was astounding. So someone coming out of a company that had been so successful, still getting no's, this was shocking, right? And I could never understand just how painful it might be as a first-time founder for a woman trying to gain the trust. And it's this catch-22, because for a lot of women to get started, they need some capital to get off the ground. And women have a lot of responsibilities outside of their idea, right? Oftentimes children or family members they help take care of. So I think that it's really amazing to see the gamble that people used to call a gamble, and now they're really seeing it as a strategic investment, right? It used to be this gamble on women, and now it's really strategic. Men used to be able to collect $50 million on an idea, and it was called innovative. It was called, impressive or exciting. That just had never been done for a woman before.
Whitney, you're also one of the youngest billionaires in the world, and you said you hope another woman comes and takes that title from you, soon. I'm curious how you create that environment for other women, and particularly for women of color. Are you doing anything to support other women in reaching, that in reaching the end of their own paths?
So, I think first and foremost, it's shocking that when our company went public, the headlines were all about the youngest this or the youngest that. And it was really astounding because, men take companies public every day, and it's never the youngest this or the youngest that to do that. And the reality is there have been a lot of guys out there in their early or maybe late 20s, early 30s that have gone public because they were given capital at a really young age on a really big, ambitious idea, maybe out of a dorm room or something. But women have never been encouraged to fail. Women have never been encouraged to take risk. And this goes so far beyond financing in the boardroom. This goes in relationships too, which is why I literally started Bumble, was to show women that you have equal opportunity to go out there and make the first move. You don't have to sit back and wait for someone to tell you your place. So, as far as how do we open doors for others, we've started a Bumble Fund, which, we've supported a lot of women and a lot of innovative companies through that, but also, just making sure that we grant opportunity to as many people across the globe as we can to come be a part of our mission. And then, part of my personal hopes and goals down the road, one day when I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that with my time and otherwise, would be able to, give back and invest in women as well.
Both of you also, sort of work in this space of kind of selling power back to people. And I'm curious, B, if you could talk a little bit about that as it relates to women's hygiene, because that's a topic that's been cast as taboo for a really, really long time. I think there's more discussion about it now. Obviously, your product is doing extremely well, and it's, you see it right at the front of Target and Walmart. And so I'm curious how you see your product's role in creating that space where women and other people can talk about their experiences more openly, and also if there's more that you still want to be doing, in that broader conversation, and how you think Honey Pot could be a part of that.
That's a good question. So first of all, Whitney, Sames, I love you. Hi. I think that it's an illusion that we can sell power back. The thing is it's always there. It's just, are you aware of the fact that you have power? Are you aware of the fact that you not having power could just be in the figment of the person's mind who doesn't think you have it, and in yours who think that you don't have it, right? You know, at Honey Pot, my goal is not, honestly, my first goal is to not sell you feminine care. My first goal is to sell you on loving yourself. My first goal is to educate you on why, right? Why use a vulva wash? Why use an herbal menstrual pad, right? Why a tampon? Why a menstrual cup? Why this, why that, right? Like, my goal is to educate our humans, is to help them understand what we do, why we do, what we use. Here's the education that we're building in. Here's the clinicals that we're building in. Here's the reason why we're doing all the things that we're doing, right? And then if you feel led to go out to the store or go to my website and buy our product, right? Then obviously that's what I want. But my goal is not to just sell things, right? I want to be the brand that helps to educate people. And I also want to be the brand that helps people understand that they have power, right? And just because you have circumstances, right, whether that circumstance be a disease, whether that circumstance be an illness, whether that circumstance be an infection, an odor, an itch, whatever, it doesn't matter. You know why? Because everybody's going through it, right? Not every human on the planet with a vagina at some point in their life is going to go through something with their vagina, right? If you were to go out and get an STI or an STD, you are not the first human to make that mistake, right? Don't feel bad for it. Take care of yourself, get yourself together. Don't feel the shame and guilt and turmoil. Don't build more cortisol in yourself when you're just dealing with things that connect you to every other human on the planet with a vagina, right? So my goal is to help people break through that, right? My goal is also to help people break through when they don't identify, right? Because we call it humans with vaginas because there's humans that use our products that may have a vagina, may have been born with that, but they don't call themselves a woman, right? There might be a human who was born with a different body part and they have decided to go through the changes and get surgery and make their body the way they feel that they should need to make it. That's their business. I want to be the brand that teaches them on how to take care of their new vagina, right? And so, you know, so education, love, humility, kindness, to be honest, that's what I'm selling, right? I'm also selling feminine care products to back that up, but it only feels right and authentic to me to come from a different place just because of all the trauma that happens around our body parts, especially those body parts. So it's really important to me that Honey Pot be a very responsible brand in how we deliver our products and our messages and our marketing, and because the stuff that Whitney was just talking about, all of these things are just conditioning. We've all just been conditioned, right? I don't want to add to that pile. I want to take the path less traveled, and I want to condition in the most positive way possible, the most responsible way possible. And so this is how we're building our brand, how we've built it. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be here.
That was amazing, by the way.
Thank you, Whitney.
I think there's a lot of synergies, obviously, with the work that both of you do in that realm. And I know you must have been thinking as well, Whitney, about some of the work that Bumble has done to empower people on your platform to get ahead of banning hate speech, of banning body shaming. I mean, the degrees to which y'all have gone to ensure that the platform is a safe space, and the work that you're still doing on that. You've been at the forefront of that for a long time. And so I'm curious what more you're planning, what, I think we're always thinking ahead, and I'm curious if you could talk to us a little bit about what might be coming next for Bumble in that space to try to create that space where the platform empowers its users and doesn't stifle them.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. By the way, B, we need a partnership immediately if we haven't already done that.
Okay.
We'll offline about it.
Okay.
So as far as what we've done, listen, part of the mission from day one was, why is the internet such a toxic place? Why do I get online and walk away depressed, anxious, hating myself, feeling terrible? And that was something I lived through. I mean, in 2014, I was being abused by complete strangers on the internet because of my departure from Tinder. And it was gut wrenching. I mean, it literally took me down to my core. And I thought to myself, I am a fortunate woman. I have support. I have a loving family. I have, this partner who supports me. What would this feel like to be a 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old girl at home under very different circumstances than me? Nowhere to turn, no support, no love. It would be earth ending, right? And so that was a big motivating factor to what would have become Bumble. And it was my sincerest hope and wish to engineer a safer, kinder, more accountable experience. And I'm so proud of Team Bumble, who has carried that torch and worked alongside, that original mission of a kinder, less toxic space. And the way we've done that is by following our own mission of accountability. How do we hold ourselves accountable to provide the best experience for people coming onto our platform? You cannot change people, but you can have consequences for bad behavior. You can say that won't fly here. So on Bumble, we do not allow pictures of guns. This was a weird phenomenon where there was a lot of folks posing with guns. I don't think that's part of a romantic story.
About that?
Nothing. It's honestly terrifying, but it's a mechanism of power, right? This was a way someone was showing power. Now, you had a lot of folks that were like, this is my hobby or whatever. It was nuanced, right? However, it doesn't fit the narrative of a healthy, empowering space. And that's not how you build healthy and equitable relationships through guns. It's just not how it works. So, by taking a stance against this, it's very polarizing in the time, but if we just continue to lead with our mission and our values, the answer is always written on the wall, right? When we come to a hard decision, what do we do for this? It's natural. You just put your mission and values on the wall, and all of a sudden the answer is there and it's clear. So, we were hearing from a lot of folks, all folks, that this fetishization and body shaming and all of these bad behaviors were plaguing them across the internet. So we reworked our terms and conditions and made a call to action that would not be allowed on our platform. And so when we look to the future, that's just scraping the surface of bad behavior. There's all sorts of nuances to connecting that makes it unhealthy and toxic in the real world, right? There's all sorts of ways that people feel emotionally beat down by interactions and relationships. So our quest is ultimately to look through all of those red flags and how do we prevent them? How do we hold our community accountable? How do we help create a kinder, more gentle way, gentler, sorry, losing my words, to interact and to build relationships? And how do we do that across not just romance, but friendship, business, and everything in between?
I wanted to talk as well about the pandemic, because the pandemic actually turned out to be a time of huge growth for both of your brands. And I think, adversity brews necessity. There's a lot of truth to that with what both of you all experienced at the beginning and at the end and where you are now in this journey. With the Honey Pot, I mean, this last year was the year you got into major retailers, and also was the year where you faced this backlash from this ad where you were just talking about wanting to empower other Black girls, and how both of those things were sort of coinciding at the same time as you were seeing all this growth with the brand. You talked a little bit about what you learned through that experience, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about what changed for the Honey Pot after that and how you're managing growth, because growth at this scale, it's especially at a time like this in the world, it must be tough.
Yeah. So this actually last year was not the year that we got into major retail. A lot of people thought that, but we were already sold in mass market retail. We had already been in Target. We had already gotten into Walmart. We had already gotten into a small group of stores in Walgreens. Now obviously that picture looks much, much, much bigger. There's actually not really a retailer that we're not in at this point, which I'm grateful to say. So last year was interesting. It was tumultuous, and the first thing that I'll say, actually, I already said the first thing I was going to say, but the first thing that I'll say about what happened with Target is that I'm incredibly grateful to all of those humans that had those terrible things to say. Because that catapulted the brand in a way that we just wouldn't have been able to afford to do, right? I'm grateful to Target for coming to us and asking us to be the brand that they put in that commercial spot. I'm grateful to those people that had terrible things to say. I'm even more grateful to the humans that went and bought up pretty much all of the stores and sold us out on our website for over 6 months. But with growth like that comes a massive awareness of where the holes are in your boat, right? And and it takes time, it takes people, it takes it takes standard operating procedures, it takes change, it takes order, it takes money, it takes patience, it takes a shit ton of mistakes. I mean, it just takes a lot, but we're here for it. And, and we're willing to take it on, obviously, because we're still here. But it's been beautiful. And the way that we're managing it is we're growing, and we're building our team, and we're focused, and our heads are down, and we're just focused on the base of our business, obviously future innovation and things like that. But but just focused on the base of our business, focused on kind of growing within the retail that we're already in, and just focusing on our structure and how we're doing everything, because we want to do it well, right? Doing it well, though, takes time, and change, and it can be a bit uncomfortable, because it doesn't just happen like that. Right? When certain things have to move and shift or change, like I said, it just takes time. So I'm just happy to be here. I'm grateful for this opportunity. There isn't even a word for how grateful and fortunate that we are to be in this place of growth. And in this place that we find ourselves at, with the humans that buy our brands, and with the retail partners that partner with us, especially Target, especially Walmart. They've partnered with us in a really big way, and we're incredibly grateful for that.
Whitney, can you talk about the surge that you all have seen in Bumble this past year, and all of the changes you all have made with allowing in-app video, and other changes you've also made with your workforce, recognizing that we're all crazy burnt out, and giving a week off, 2 weeks, and unlimited vacation. I'm wondering if you could talk about how the pandemic has empowered you to do things that perhaps you were thinking about for a long time, and how it seems like a lot of folks are taking this moment to really just lean in and finally do those things that maybe they've been wanting to.
Yeah, I'll never forget, probably 5 or 6 years ago, sitting in multiple rooms at multiple times with people saying, not just me saying this, many people saying this, like, video is the future of dating, because it takes out so much of the insecurities of meeting essentially a stranger for the first time in real life. Like, you have this barrier that not only protects you from potential risk, but it really saves you time. If you think someone is cute or attractive in photos, or you like what they had to say in their bio, that's fine. But, nothing can replace watching how someone speaks, or seeing how they move, or, the way they laugh at something. That is so intrinsic to being a human being, and what we're attracted to, or what we connect with. And so, we've been saying for years and years, video is the future. Video is the future of dating. Video is the future of online dating. And it will be the gateway to offline dating. Like, you will date offline after you meet by video. And so we had built that feature prior to the pandemic. So when the pandemic hit, I think there was a lot of confusion of, well, how does a dating app survive when you're literally in the business of sending people out into the real world, when there is no longer this like real world to go to, right? Everyone has to be isolated. And then that was just when things started to surge. We were very fortunate, similar to UB, we were in a good place, right? When it hit, which we were really lucky, and we didn't really know what to expect. But we were very lucky that it went in the direction of positivity, and that early bet we had made on video was in fact validated through this incredibly isolating time. And so we really leaned into that. We really leaned into showcasing and explaining to people the benefit of meeting virtually first, right? We had Tiffany Haddish, who met her boyfriend. I don't know if they're still together, but they were doing these really cute Bumble virtual video dates during the pandemic, cooking dinners together and doing all this stuff from different places. And so we really just leaned into the power of meeting through video first. And then, of course, you can never replace the need to meet each other, but there was this really beautiful silver lining through the pandemic, and it's still ongoing. We've heard of countless relationships where people didn't even ever see each other in real life for months, and they became in full-blown exclusive relationships all through the power of technology. And now we've since heard from them, they've moved in together post vaccinations and post all of this, and they're happily ever after. And the fact that we were able to be this very small glimpse of hope or glimpse of connection in an otherwise incredibly isolating time, that's something that we're pretty proud of.
So I'm wondering what comes next for the two of you, since we've got the Bumblebee and we've got Honeypot. Are we watching the cracking of the C-suite happening, before our eyes? Of course.
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Totally. Something about how we all lift each other up. I think there's something to be said there about that.
Absolutely. I mean, we're super on brand with all of the branding opportunity there. And the intention behind everything you're doing is just amazing. I love the way you're approaching it, and it's authentic and it's kind and it's genuine and it's what we need. And so I'm really impressed, and I'm glad we finally got to meet.
Me too. And you're doing the same type of work, girl. What we're doing being the change in the world we want to live in, is necessary, right? It's necessary for people, A, to know that you can run a business this way, and B, to know that you can be a good human and still do dope stuff and still make money and still, go public or, raise money, exit your company, keep it forever. You can do whatever it is that you decide to do, and you can do it all while being who you are, right? And I think, I don't say this with ego, but I think, Whitney, you and I are really great examples of that you really can have it all, right? You have to stick to your guns, and you can't deviate. You just have to stay focused on that. So I'm hitting you up an email right after this. Yes. Same.
Yeah, I cannot wait to connect offline. But yes, this is exactly right. Cracking the C-suite.
Well, I can't think of any better place to leave it at that. I can't wait to see the collab between the two of you. And it's been such a pleasure to have you both here with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. We will connect offline.
Perfect. Take care.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney, B, and Chabeli, for that empowering conversation. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It was a fabulous day of programming.
A special thanks again to our founding sponsor, Supermajority Education Fund, our presenting sponsor, The Impact Seat, and supporting sponsors, the Barbara Lee Family Foundation, the Facebook Journalism Project, and the Tory Burch Foundation. A final thanks to our media partner, the PBS NewsHour.
If you liked what you saw today, we hope you'll join the 19th. We're a member-supported newsroom, and we simply can't put on events like this one without the support of people like you. You can join by donating now at 19thnews.org/membership. You can also support our nonprofit newsroom by signing up for our free newsletter at 19thnews.org/subscribe. If you missed any part of today's program or you just want to rewatch, you can visit 19thnews.org/events. We'll see you back here tomorrow for day 4. We'll discuss how storytellers and breakout stars are remaking the world we see in entertainment and media. Representation matters in culture.